This wasn't a rental. This was a deeded home. The ultimate power moved from a woman named Karen. When the judge finally looked up, his jaw was tight, his face unreadable. We all held our breath, waiting for the verdict that would decide if a petty feud could actually cost someone their entire life. What happens when the person signing the eviction is the one who ultimately loses everything? The home was more than just a house. It was the quiet, hard-earned culmination of years. It sat on the edge of the development, backing onto a stretch of mature oaks that felt less like a suburb and more like a carefully manicured slice of nature. For the homeowner, it represented sanctuary. Every swing of the hammer, every coat of paint was an investment not just of money, but of soul. This was the place where the morning coffee tasted better, where the world felt manageable, protected by the very picket fences and trimmed hedges that defined the community of Stone Creek. Stone Creek was, on its surface, the pinnacle of suburban harmony. A place where children rode bikes freely and the lawns were uniform fields of vibrant, compliant green. The HOA, the Stone Creek Association, was initially nothing more than a quarterly bill and an annual meeting. A necessary evil, perhaps, but a background hum that guaranteed property values remained stable. The rules were tedious but rarely enforced with any real zeal, at least not until the arrival of the new board president. This person, known simply in the neighborhood as the administrator, didn't see the rules as guidelines. She saw them as a sacred covenant. For her, the covenant was a tool to enforce a personal vision of perfection, a vision that had no tolerance for individuality, slight variations, or the quiet imperfections that make a house a home. The homeowner had been blissfully unaware of this shift in the power dynamic. They lived simply, asking for nothing more than peace and the ability to enjoy the shade of their own front porch. The impending conflict wasn't about a crumbling roof or an overgrown yard. It was about something far smaller, far more absurdly petty. It started, as these dramas often do, with a tiny, overlooked fixture of the exterior. The homeowner, dedicated to the small comforts, had sought to replace an aging piece of hardware. A simple, beautiful choice that added a touch of rustic character. Something that didn't detract from the neighborhood aesthetic, but rather softened its rigidity. They thought nothing of it. It was, after all, their property. But in Stone Creek, the line between personal property and community control was razor-thin, and the administrator had a microscopic eye. The replacement hardware, chosen for its durability and charm, was apparently the wrong shade of bronze. An offense so minor it barely registered on a human scale, but to the HOA it was an act of defiance. The first letter arrived not as a friendly warning, but as a formal, intimidating demand. It was a sterile, unforgiving document that signaled the end of the quiet life. It was the first skirmish in a war no one in Stone Creek even knew was about to begin. A war that would escalate from a misplaced piece of bronze to a threat against the homeowner's very right to inhabit their sanctuary. The stakes were set, not by a crime, but by a color chip. The first letter was just the beginning. The second one arrived exactly 7 days later, a stark reminder that the administrator was a creature of unflinching bureaucracy. It wasn't a follow-up. It was a Level 2 violation notice, demanding a hefty fine for the unapproved material change to the exterior. The homeowner was stunned by the speed and the cold indifference of the language. They had attempted to comply, buying a replacement mailbox fixture that met the stated specifications. But the HOA wasn't interested in resolution. They were interested in punishment. The response letter, meticulously drafted by the homeowner, was detailed and logical, citing previous board approvals for similar fixtures in the neighborhood. It was met with silence, followed by a third notice that simply doubled the fine and tacked on a new violation: failure to respond in a timely manner to an official board communication. The homeowner realized this wasn't about the hardware anymore. This was a power play, a deliberate, escalating tactic designed to break their spirit and drain their bank account. The war then moved from the mailbox to the front yard. The administrator, emboldened by the homeowner's attempt to fight the initial fine, began an intense, almost microscopic surveillance campaign. Where others saw a well-kept lawn, the administrator saw opportunity. A newly planted shrub, meant to provide future privacy, was suddenly deemed non-compliant with the approved landscape species list. even though it was a native plant. A single rose bush that dared to grow slightly taller than the prescribed height limit of the flowerbeds earned another fine. The homeowner felt their sanctuary shrinking with every passing week, replaced by a suffocating cloud of scrutiny. Every mundane choice became an act of defiance, and every new piece of mail was a source of crippling anxiety. The fines were stacking up with a terrifying, compounding interest, a small seed of petty control that was growing into a financial monster. This constant pressure forced the homeowner into a cycle of defending trivialities. They spent hours documenting the neighborhood, photographing every single violation that was being ignored on other properties. The dilapidated fence 3 doors down, the unapproved paint color on the neighbor's shutters, the perpetually overflowing community recycling bin. The evidence of selective enforcement was overwhelming. The homeowner presented this photographic proof to the board, a clear, undeniable case of arbitrary rule application. They expected the board to see reason, to recognize the malice behind the administrator's actions. Instead, the board, comprised mostly of nodding, agreeable figures terrified of the administrator's wrath, dismissed the evidence entirely. They issued a new, specific rule. No homeowner shall use photographic documentation of other properties as a defense against a current violation. This wasn't just unfair. It was a clear demonstration that the rules were being written specifically to facilitate the homeowner's defeat. The realization was stark. The system was rigged, and the administrator had successfully weaponized the entire HOA structure. The conflict reached a new, chilling level when the homeowner decided they could no longer simply comply with every insane demand. They decided to stand their ground on a matter of safety. Their small dog, a beloved member of the family, needed a secure place to exercise. They installed a small, inconspicuous, temporary barrier in the backyard, easily removable and compliant with all local fencing codes. It was barely visible above the existing hedge line. Within 48 hours, a formal board resolution was taped to their front door, not tucked into the mailbox. The barrier was an unapproved structure and a potential safety hazard. The fine was astronomical, and this time, the document included a new, terrifying phrase: failure to remit outstanding debt will result in the immediate placement of a lien on the property. The threat of a lien, the ultimate weapon of the HOA, shifted the dynamic from petty neighbor drama to a genuine crisis. The accumulated fines, generated from a bronze fixture, a rose bush, and a dog fence, now exceeded the threshold for legal action. The homeowner scrambled to find a solution, exhausting every internal appeal process. They hired an attorney not to fight the $40 fine, but to fight the principle that a private organization could effectively extort them out of their home equity over a matter of aesthetics. The attorney confirmed the grim reality. HOA liens are powerful, and fighting them requires massive financial and emotional capital. But before the attorney could even formally intervene, the final blow landed. The administrator, clearly incensed that the homeowner had dared to hire legal counsel, escalated the war one last time. Leveraging the technical default from the unresolved lien, she pushed through a notice of intent to foreclose and evict. It wasn't just a threat anymore. It was the final, devastating paperwork. The shock was physical. The realization that one woman's petty obsession could actually lead to the loss of everything. The sanctuary, the investment, the years of hard work was overwhelming. The homeowner stared at the legal documents, their own name typed next to the chilling word, defendant. The only path left was the courtroom, and the chance of victory felt microscopically small. They had fought over a mailbox, and now they were fighting for their right to live under their own roof. The entire neighborhood was silently watching, waiting to see if the administrator would succeed in setting the most terrifying precedent of all. The sterile air of the courtroom offered no comfort. It was a place where the stakes were impossibly high, where a petty fight over a bronze fixture had metastasized into a legal battle for the right to live under your own roof. The homeowner sat rigidly, the entire weight of their defense resting on a single, slender manila folder and the weary conviction that what was happening was fundamentally wrong. Across the aisle, the administrator sat in rigid self-importance, flanked by the HOA's high-priced counsel. She wore the expression of someone attending a mere formality, utterly certain of her power and the inevitable vindication of her perfect rules. The HOA's presentation was brutal and clinical. They focused solely on the accumulated debt, the meticulous chain of unanswered notices, the technical compliance of their process. They didn't mention the mailbox or the rose bush. They spoke only in dollar figures and legal statutes, painting the homeowner as a delinquent and disruptive element who had purposefully ignored the authority of the governing body. Their lawyer presented the notice of intent to foreclose with a detached flourish, treating the eviction as the simple, logical consequence of a homeowner's financial irresponsibility. It was a terrifying demonstration of how effectively pettiness could be sanitized and weaponized by law. The emotional peak hit when the HOA's lawyer formally requested the court to uphold the lien and grant the eviction. The homeowner felt a desperate, suffocating wave of helplessness. All the hours of documentation, all the appeals, all the attempts to reason. It had all led to this moment where a judge's gavel could erase their entire sanctuary. Then, it was the homeowner's turn. Their attorney, quiet and methodical, didn't attempt to argue the existence of the fines. Instead, he started with a single document, the Stone Creek Association's founding charter. He patiently walked the court through a clause that had been buried in the original declarations, a clause concerning selective enforcement. "Your Honor," the attorney stated, his voice steady, "the defense does not dispute that a lien was attempted for non-payment. The defense disputes the validity of the debt itself on the grounds of demonstrated, deliberate malice and selective enforcement, which, under Section 4B, renders any subsequent action null and void." Palpable tension filled the room. The administrator's confident posture began to shift, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing her face. The homeowner's attorney then unveiled the secret weapon, a stack of printed, time-stamped emails and meeting minutes. These were not photos of other people's violations. These were internal HOA communications recovered during the discovery process. The emails revealed that the administrator had not just ignored the homeowner's appeals, but had actively and repeatedly directed the management company to escalate the fines after the homeowner attempted to comply. One email, displayed clearly on the monitor, was a direct order to find any reason to enforce the full fine schedule until they concede. "We must make an example." This was not a simple failure to follow rules. This was malicious intent, documented and undeniable. The courtroom absorbed the gravity of the betrayal. It proved that the fines were not about community standards. They were about crushing dissent. The administrator, now visibly rattled, leaned forward to whisper furiously to her lawyer. The HOA attorney, clearly blindsided by the depth of the discovery evidence, could only offer weak objections, which the judge dismissed with a sharp wave of his hand. The climax culminated when the homeowner's attorney pulled out one final document, a 20-year-old architectural review approval form for the original model home that the administrator now occupied. He pointed to the material list. The list specified a very distinct, expensive type of cedar shingle that the administrator's home did not, in fact, have. "Your Honor," the attorney concluded, "we have shown that the administrator weaponized her position to pursue a campaign of personal, malicious financial destruction against my client over a $40 mailbox fixture. Simultaneously, she has been living in violation of the very covenant she sought to enforce, a violation that, under their own published fine schedule, would amount to a current debt of over $55,000. The courtroom went utterly silent. The sheer hypocrisy was breathtaking. The administrator had sought to evict a person over a cosmetic detail while living with a violation 500 times greater than the homeowner's total fine accumulation. The judge sat back, his expression indeed priceless. He didn't shout or demand order. He simply let the weight of the evidence hang in the air for a long, agonizing moment. He looked first at the administrator, who was now pale and slumped, and then directly at the homeowner, a look that conveyed both sympathy and professional fury. He lowered his gavel, not to strike, but to steady his hand. This court finds the entire line of action by the Stone Creek Association, under the direction of Ms., the administrator's title, to be arbitrary, capricious, and undertaken with demonstrable malice. The outstanding lien is vacated and declared void. The eviction action is dismissed with prejudice. But he wasn't finished. He then issued the legal bombshell that broke the HOA's control. Furthermore, Due to the intentional, documented abuse of governing power, this court finds the Stone Creek Association liable for all of the defendant's legal fees and, pending a review of the intentional violation of fiduciary duty, issues a temporary injunction against all current board members from enacting or enforcing any new rule or fine until a full, supervised financial and governance audit is completed. The administrator's face crumbled. It wasn't just a loss of the lawsuit. It was the public, devastating dissolution of her power, and the very system she had misused had been shattered in a single moment. She had walked in to evict a neighbor and walked out having lost her authority, her credibility, and facing the immediate financial ruin of the HOA she claimed to protect. The cost of one petty mailbox feud had just become the price of an entire community's freedom. The sudden, authoritative sound of the judge's dismissal echoed in the silence, an instantaneous annihilation of months of calculated malice. For the homeowner, the sound of the gavel was not just a legal decision. It was the cracking of a sustained tension that had bound their chest for nearly a year. They did not feel an explosion of joy, but a deep, physical release. The air rushing back into lungs that had forgotten how to breathe freely. Across the room, the spectacle of the administrator's undoing played out in public. Her composure, which had been her defining armor, shattered. She didn't look like an authority figure. She looked like a child caught cheating a high-stakes test. Her expensive lawyer, who had been paid handsomely to guarantee this victory, now looked disgusted, quickly gathering his papers and distancing himself from the toxic fallout. She was abandoned, left alone to absorb the fact that her personal crusade had not only failed but had brought the entire structure she cherished crashing down. She had sought to claim the homeowner's peace. Instead, the judge had claimed her absolute power. She left the courtroom not with dignity, but in a defeated rush, melting into the city streets, a person who was no longer the administrator, but simply a humiliated neighbor. The journey home was marked by an almost unbelievable lightness. The legal documents, the eviction notice, the lien threat, the mounting fines were now inert paper. They were trophies of a war won, not threats to a sanctuary lost. When the homeowner finally walked through their front door, the home no longer felt like a staging ground for a battle. It was a haven again, the unapproved bronze fixture, the catalyst for this entire nightmare, now shone brightly, a tiny, defiant monument to the successful defense of one's own property rights. The real revolution, however, was happening in the community of Stone Creek. News travels fast when the subject is public humiliation and financial disaster. The silent majority, those neighbors who had been too afraid to challenge the administrator, saw the court's ruling as a lifeline. The injunction was the key. No new rules, no new fines, and a mandatory audit overseen by a court-appointed administrator. It stripped the HOA board, and the administrator in particular, of every single weapon they possessed. The financial fallout was swift and devastating. The court-mandated audit revealed exactly what the homeowner's attorney had suspected. The HOA's reserves were thin, largely due to the administrator's frivolous spending and the massive, unnecessary legal fees incurred fighting the homeowner's justified appeal. The board was suddenly forced to pay the homeowner's significant legal bills, a crushing blow that plunged the association into effective insolvency. The irony was exquisite. The administrator's obsession with a few $100s in fines had cost the community tens of thousands, ensuring her own departure. The subsequent special election was a landmark event. For the first time in years, neighbors talked openly, not in whispers, about governance, fairness, and the right to personalize their homes. The homeowner, weary but respected, declined a board position, but their action had spurred a slate of reasonable, community-focused candidates who swept the election. The new board's first act was to systematically review and abolish the petty, selectively enforced rules that had plagued the community, prioritizing safety and maintenance over aesthetic micromanagement. The dog barrier was officially approved. The mailbox fixture became the standard new approved item. The long-term impact was profound. The court ruling established a legal precedent within that jurisdiction, confirming that selective and malicious enforcement of HOA covenants could not only void fines but could lead to the total collapse of the board's authority and financial liability for the association. It sent a clear message that an HOA is not a kingdom. It is a fiduciary responsibility, and abusing that responsibility has consequences that outweigh the comfort of petty power. The homeowner was never harassed again. They became a quiet, respected figure, not a rabble-rouser, but a defender of boundaries. Their home remained their sanctuary, now protected not just by a deed, but by a decisive victory in a court of law. The conflict had been a terrible emotional drain, but the result was the sweet, enduring truth that sometimes, standing against the absurdity of a small tyrant is the only way to ensure freedom for everyone. The entire story became a powerful reminder that these minor community dictatorships often rely on silence and fear to maintain their control. The moment someone shines a light on the abuse, the moment someone is willing to fight the high cost of a low fine, the entire fragile structure can collapse. It proves that the true value of a home isn't just in its market price, but in the peace and autonomy it represents. This story serves as a testament to the quiet power of standing up against institutionalized pettiness. Because what is the point of owning your own home if you are forced to live under a dictatorship that dictates the color of your life? Is true property ownership about the deed in your hand, or the courage to defend the boundaries of your own peace?